Welcome. My name is Nick, and this is Nick's Fort, and today I'm going to share with you guys all of my information related to contracts and how they relate to freelancing. I've been freelancing for 12 years, and over that time, I've learned a lot about how to deal with contracts. I've had a lot of success stories. I've had a lot of kind of failure stories, and I'm going to share those stories with you guys. I want to remind you guys that I am recording this live, so if you are listening to this after the fact, I want to let you know that you can kind of treat this as a podcast. You can just listen in. I am going to have some visuals on screen for you guys, so if you do treat it as a podcast, you can come back and you can check those visuals out after the fact, but you're going to get a lot of the information just by listening. And if you are tuned in live, thanks for tuning in live. You guys can drop some questions. I have a bunch of questions from you guys already that I gathered on my Instagram. So if you're not following me on my Instagram, you can check it out. It's at Nick's Fort, and you can always ask me questions on there. First, there's a couple of little housekeeping things. First off, I'm not a lawyer, so I want you to understand that the information that I'm sharing related to contracts is based on my experience working in this industry, in this field for myself for 12 years. So I'm not a lawyer. You should get a lawyer. I have a lawyer, and he's helped me make my contract and refine it over the years. And he's also helped me get out of a lot of situations, which I will share with you guys. So if you are a freelancer, getting a lawyer is a good idea. I'm going to take these headphones off. Another thing that I want to share with you guys is as I've done this, I've made a contract. So I made a contract template for you guys that you guys can now use in your own freelance endeavors. And I'll talk about them more at the end, but again, kind of goes back to the get a lawyer. So if you get this contract template from me, you should still make it your own. And there is a link in the description, and I will drop a link in the chat to that template. Let's see. Here, let me drop the link in the chat real quick. And that is the link for the contract. It's also in the description. Okay. Hey, Black Magic. Thanks for chatting in the chat. So if you are live, feel free to chat in the chat and chat amongst each other, chat with me. I'll check in every now and then and give you, get answers to questions and stuff like that. But I want to start this out with a story. So this story is something that happened to me years ago, and it's a story of vulnerabilities. It's a story about a contract. It's a story about the power of a contract. And basically, I was approached with a really big opportunity, probably one of the biggest of my career at that point. It was to do a big campaign. It was going to be a national campaign, and it was a really big opportunity. And I was working with the account manager to negotiate the contract, and it was a really brutal negotiation for me, and probably for her also. We had a lot of different sticking points in that negotiation, and I honestly lost sleep at night. And at this point in my career, I was also I was in need of money. Like, I needed this contract to happen, so I was kind of desperate. And because of that, I was willing to sort of make all these sacrifices on my end for the contract. And one of the things in that contract that we had talked about was usage, and I was told that the usage for the project would not involve, being used on billboards and bus wraps and these big environments. But I was told that the contract itself needed to have the broad usage for this outdoor display which would include those things. But in good faith, I was told that that would not be the case, and I took that as, good faith. I said, okay, cool, that's good. We have a relationship. Let's move forward. And one of, I would say, I guess my inside person, after we negotiated this contract and we went back and forth, and I kind of undercut myself on pricing a bunch during the negotiations, my inside person told me that the president of this organization had told her that someone should give me a lesson in business. And that, to me, at that moment was really shitty. It made me feel like a piece of shit. It's pardon my language, but it did. Felt awful. And so set that aside. We did the project, turned out fantastic. It was really good. It was successful. And a few months down the road, I was actually in another state traveling, and I saw this campaign all over billboards, all over buses. It was used in this context that I was told in good faith that it would not be used. And for me, that was super disappointing, and it was a really valuable lesson. But that's not the end of the story. That's like the beginning of the story. And so, I kind of said, okay, I sort of get screwed, but I got screwed within the legal confines of the contract. So that's fine. Okay, my bad. Shouldn't have trusted someone, right? I guess I shouldn't have. And that's not the point of the story, is not to trust people, but it is a big learning lesson. So anyways, that happens. The term eventually of the usage. So the term of a contract usage is how long someone's allowed to use it. So in my contract, it had a term. So I can't remember exactly what it was, but let's say it was a year long. After that, they had to renew the contract to have the rights to use this content for their advertising campaign. Anyways, they approached me and they said, hey, we want to renew the rights to use the content in the campaign. Sorry, I'm being vague. I can't give away who this is or what happened specifically. It's just not okay, I don't think. I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. Anyways, so they wanted to redo this. They wanted to re-up the contract. And I said, okay, here's the rate for you to redo your license. And they said, ooh, that doesn't really work. How about half of that? And I was kind of like, at that point, I was like, well, that's what you guys did to me last time. And that was terrible. And then, there's kind of this behind the back sort of thing happening. And like, I was like, you know what? No, this is the rate that I want to use. And so the president of that company, the one who had previously told my friend the words of wisdom for me, left me a voicemail. And in that voicemail, he said, oh, we have all this new work for you. We have all this new stuff that we're going to do with you. And it's going to be like really creative. And we're going to give you all this like freedom and flexibility. And it was like this carrot there. He was dangling this carrot in front of my face. And in my head, I was like, you've never really been that nice to me. This has never been the way that you speak to me. So then why is this the case? Well, again, inside person hooks me up with a little information, and I find out that I'm going to be solicited with a fake request for a proposal that the president is making someone at the company do. Someone I've never talked to. So this poor person has to reach out to me with a fake request for a proposal. And I know this, so I get this email, and I know it's fake, and I know it's coming from that individual. And so then at that point, I'm like, all right, cool. I kind of have this inside look on what's happening here. I'm going to stay strong on my rate. I don't care. It doesn't matter. They're trying to screw me over. And so I stayed strong on my rate. I said, this is how much it costs to renew. And they said, well, we're going to have our lawyers look at this. And they sort of threatened this legal review of the contract that we had prior. And I knew it was good. So I talked to my lawyer, and I started working with my lawyer to refine my talking points in the conversations. Because at this point, we're getting to a point of legitimate confrontation amongst one another. So I want to make sure that I'm not doing anything wrong. I want to make sure that I'm positioning myself as a good business person. And so I'm working with my lawyer, and I'm making the verbiage that I use in my emails right. I want to make it sound right, and we're sort of strategizing on the other end of things as this conversation moves forward. It comes to a halt, it stops, and then, they're not going to renew. So then the term actually ends for the rights of this content, right? Term is done. And a few months pass, and I go out and I do my due diligence to check and see if they're still using this content on, their website, on their social media, on their, platforms and stuff. And what do you know? They've breached the contract. They're still using this content on their channels, And so I reach out to my lawyer and I say, hey, you know that whole thing that happened? They're still using it. Now they're outside of the contract. And so my lawyer said, okay, I'll send them a letter. And so he sent them a letter and said, hey, you guys are in breach of the contract. You know, we've been negotiating with you. You either need to license the content or remove it. And so at that point, they came back to me again and said, we'd like to license your content for the rate that you want. So 8 months after this whole thing started, they came back and I held strong and I stood behind my rate and my beliefs. And they licensed this content at the rate that I had given them. And a few months later, I was actually having lunch with the inside person who is a friend of mine. And I said, she had moved on. She had moved on from the company. And I told her that if she ever ran into that president of that company again, that maybe someone should give him a lesson in business. So that's kind of a story of a contract situation that I had. And it was a really big learning experience for me. And I think you guys can probably take a lot away from that, I hope. And now I'm going to sort of dive into some specifics related to contracts. And I'm going to actually bring up on screen some talking points. So if you are watching, you can check that out. And if you're not watching, you can look at it later. So give me 1 second here, and we are good. Okay, so now that I have these talking points on screen, big picture when it comes to contracts, you need to use a contract now. Don't wait to start using a contract. Even if you don't have the perfect contract, even if it needs to be amended as you move forward, you should start using a contract today. Like, don't do another project without a contract. And I've been using one for, 12 years, and it's grown over time, and I've added stuff. And actually, I literally just talked with my wife this weekend about a project she's working on, because she's also freelance, and an amendment to her contract she made that I'm going to add to mine. So it's an ever-growing thing. Start using one now. You amend it with your learnings. As you go, you add things that are specific to your industry. And basically, unfortunately, a way that it works is that you find out the hard way that you need to do something. So, for example, in that situation with the story I shared, a hard lesson in that is if someone says they're going to use it a certain way, but the contract says otherwise, they are going to have the ability to do that, which is obvious, but it's a hard learning. And, if you want to amend your contract to reflect that, you need to do that. Another thing that's really important that I think a lot of people don't understand related to contracts is that a good, healthy contract builds rapport with your client. So Truth is a company that I've been working with forever, and I have a really good rapport with them. And I think it's because over the years we've had this professional relationship, we've had different contracts, we've done different things. And as you go through that process and you grow together, our contract today is not the same as it was, 10 years ago when I started working for them. Building a good contract relationship with a client shows that you're a good business person. It allows for you to show that to them, and it builds rapport. So that's a thing that I think is kind of underlooked. And then in your contracts, I think it's important to set expectations. Don't be sneaky. And I think that can go both ways. So that can be if you're a client or a vendor. We are thinking in the world of being a vendor ourselves and working with a client. The last thing you want to do is try to sneak something in that's going to screw your client over, because that's not going to build rapport with your client and result in a long-term relationship. Keeping the current clients you have is a lot easier than finding new clients. So set the expectations. And honestly, if you have a new client and there's things in your contract that you know they're in there, and it is their responsibility to read it, but you want them to know that they're in there, you want to reinforce it, let them know. In my contract, I have a clause related to cancellations, postponements, things of that nature. And that clause is very robust. Okay, that clause has done great things for me because it's strong. But I would hate for a client to engage with me, sign this contract, not read that, and then have the consequences of them canceling and then the financial consequence of that for me. Because if you cancel the contract with me, there's a consequence financially. And if you're not aware of that, that might rub you the wrong way. It is your responsibility to read a contract, but in that instance, I might start working with someone new and just say, hey, here's my contract. We reviewed it. Did you have a chance to look at the postponement cancellation section? It is an important clause in my contract, and I want you to understand that I enforce that. And then if you say that in the beginning, you're going to build a good relationship. And then if it happens, they're going to understand the consequences of canceling, and it's just going to be better for everyone. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide here. Some more big picture stuff for contracts. Actually, I'm going to get a little sip of cough. Hold on. All right. Yeah, if you guys are listening live, drop some comments in the chat here. You guys can say hey, and I'll shout you out, say hi to you guys. And also, if you're here, drop a thumbs up on the video. Okay, big picture stuff. We're talking contracts. Be specific. So in here we have, timing, deliverables, pre, post, the 5 W's, and how. These are some examples. And this applies to contracts in general. So whether you're a filmmaker, photographer, graphic designer, whatever, be specific in your contract about your services. The more specific you can be without going over the top insane, the better. Because when you come back to a point of contention with your client, if there's an argument, if there's a sticking point, if you have a contract that states specifically what is expected, you're in good shape because it solves the problem. That is so nice to have. When things are vague and you're able to interpret them differently, that's when you can get in trouble. You might interpret something different than your client if it's vague. But if the contract says we're giving you 2 videos, and each video is 15 seconds long, and they're going to be delivered on December 15th, 2019. And then they say, oh, we thought it meant 3 videos. It's pretty clear that 2 is not 3. You're out. And obviously you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't be a dick, but it's just funny because it's like, that's a joke. Anyways, so be specific about everything in your contracts. Don't overdo it, but be specific. And I think being specific with the least amount of words is a talent that you can develop with your writing skills, and over time you can do that. Which, if you are tuning in late or if you're kind of jumping around, I do have a contract template that I have created, and not to toot my own horn, but it's been made over like 8 years, and I think that there are a lot of examples of specific good talking points, specific good contract points, without being too wordy in my contract. There's a link to it below in the description. There's also one in the chat. So another big picture thing is you need to define the responsibilities for you and your client in the contract. So when you make a contract, there's a section, you should have a section where you define what you're responsible for, and then you also define what they're responsible for. So that could be as simple as, you're responsible for pre-production, post-production, and production, right? And then they're responsible for distribution. They're responsible for sourcing the talent, and they're responsible for the location costs. Whatever it is, outline the responsibilities in your contract so there is no discrepancies as to who is providing what. And that could even come down to the food on the day of the shoot, right? So who's buying lunch? Put it in the contract. Figure it out in the contract. Your company is going to get it catered. You build that into your budget. It's in the contract. There's no, oh, are you getting lunch? Who's getting lunch? Kind of, we don't want to have that conversation. Put it in the contract. Another big picture thing is the budget and payment schedule. In your contract, you want to make sure that you have a budget. And when I say budget, I want to be very clear that I do not mean a full breakdown of your internal budget. I'm talking big picture. The bigger, the better. I think that is my mentality when it comes to numbers, estimates, quotes, bids, all of that stuff. Start with a big number. And then if the client really needs to see the breakdown, break it down one more level. So big picture, in your budget, grand total, $50,000. Great. And then you have maybe payment 1, payment 2, payment 3, and you do 50% for the first payment, 25% for the second payment, 25% for the last payment, and you have dates on which those are due. First one is due date of signing, second one is due after production, third one is due upon delivery of final assets, right? You break it down, and then if they say, we want to know more about where that money's going, then you say, okay, cool. Post-production, pre-production, production, each one, the 3 categories, it's 10,000, 20,000, 20,000, right? And then they want to know more, and you just go level by level, and eventually, hopefully, most clients, if they have a budget, they need something done. Can they accomplish it with that budget? They're going to be happy to accomplish it. They don't really care about the nitty-gritty granular. Some individuals do, and that can become problematic if it gets too deep in the nitty-gritty. But most often, most people in those situations are just going to say, this is how much it costs, this is what I'm getting. So in your contract, keep it big. And you also want, like I said in that example, you want a payment schedule. And that's a personal choice. I would recommend, if you can, especially if you have upfront costs on your end, you want to get a larger portion of the payment in the front versus the back of the project. But you also might want to consider if someone pays you 100% of the contract on day one, but then there's no defined start date in your project, and you have their money for a year and you haven't done the project, that's bad, because you're going to have all this income that you haven't done anything for, and that can screw you in the tax purposes. You're not going to have the expenses related to it. So also consider the other side of things, where it's, you want money up front to get things done, but you also need a good start date. You need to have those parameters, and you build that into your contract. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, guys, if you're live, drop questions in the chat. I will get to them as we come to the back of this, as we come to the end of this live stream. I will answer your questions in the chat, and I will also answer the questions that people sent me prior. All right, contract to-do list. I talked about this earlier. Get a lawyer that aligns with you and your needs. I got a lawyer myself, I want to say 8 years ago, something like that. And I called around town, Google, lawyer, call around town, told people what I did for a living, told them the needs I had, and kind of got recommended. And also told them sort of my price range. Lawyers can be expensive. And after a few phone calls, I finally got recommended to my lawyer, who is the frickin' man. His name is Eric, and he's a boss, and he specializes in copyright litigation. So litigation means that he can actually go to trial, and he does work in the courtroom, but he also does the work on the back end in his office with contracts and all that stuff. So if need be, if I had a situation like the story I shared earlier, so if you're tuning in late, there's a story on the front of this related to a contract that did not go to litigation, it did not go to court, but if it had, he would have been able to handle that situation really well, because he's versed in copyright, and that would have been a sort of in that category of like usage beyond the contract and a copyright infringement sort of a thing. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what it is, but he's in that world. And And so that was good for me. And it was in like a small town in New Hampshire when I found him. So it was sort of hard for me to find a filmmaking lawyer. So like if you're in LA or New York or something, then it's going to be a lot easier. It's probably going to be more money. But yeah, you can do your research and find a good lawyer and then sit down with them, meet with them, make sure you got a good vibe. I feel like Eric and I have a good rapport, and I think that's important for a lawyer. He's, we have shared interests. We're almost like buddies. I don't use him very often, and that's the thing is he was like, the chances are you won't use me very often, but when you need to, I'm the dude. And I'm like, yeah. So over the course of my career, if I ever need to, I'll use him, and if not, then I check in with him like once or twice. I don't know, maybe once a year, maybe every 2 years. It's not a big thing. In the beginning, it might cost a little bit to get your paperwork dialed, but then you make this initial investment in a good contract, and then it saves your ass over and over and over, and it's really, really worth it. So that's important. Another thing on the contract to-do list is to keep a clear head. And I think that this is important when it comes to talking to clients about your contract. It's really important to not take it personal when you're negotiating a contract, because that can be difficult, and negotiating a budget. It's most likely not about your work. It's not about your style. It's not about you as a person. It's about the business side of things. It's about managing risk. It's about the money, and so like all of these things, you want to keep a clear head and try to take a step back and sort of, if you can think about the conversations about contracts, and then there's a buffer between you and the conversation about contracts, and then there's you, keep that in that little buffer zone. Keep the conversation there as long as you can, and kind of look at it outside of it being personal, and that's going to allow you to have a much clearer head when you come to those conversations and the emails and all that stuff related to contracts. If someone doesn't want to pay you X amount of dollars for usage, it's probably because they don't have the budget for it. Sure, sometimes someone might be pinching pennies, and that happens, but you'll feel that out over time. Another thing that's important and is really hard in the beginning, and it's going to be hard in the beginning, is to hold your ground when you are dealing with contracts and dealing with rates and stuff like that. And it can be difficult to do that because you need that money, you need that paper. Okay, I get it. I've been there, and I've compromised myself in those situations in the past. But sometimes you hold your ground and it works out, and sometimes you hold your ground and it doesn't work out. But if you want to succeed in the long run, you have to start having a cutoff point at some point with where you're willing to go with your contracts and your budgets. Because if you undercut yourself and you keep doing that, you're racing to the bottom, and you're never going to win, and this is never going to be a lifestyle that you get to have. And there is risk involved in there. But the thing is, you really got to think about is that not every client is for you. And it's super important to understand that. Some clients are for Jimmy, and some clients are for Susan, and some clients are for Nick. And we all have different structures to how we're going to work. So maybe you do weddings, right? And you have to do 20 weddings a year. And each wedding, I'm so bad at math, we're going to bust out a calculator. 20 times, let's say you charge $5,000, right? That's $100,000. That's great. And that could meet your needs. And maybe after expenses, you pay yourself well. So you do 20 weddings at $5,000 each. But when someone comes to you and says, I would like to do a wedding for $3,000, you say, I'm sorry, that's not how much I charge. I would love to work with you. If you can afford $5,000, then I'm happy to talk with you. If you can't, then I have a friend who does weddings for $3,000, and I'll recommend him, and vice versa. So you hold your ground. In the long run, it will pay off. Another thing related to contracts is when you have a sticking point in a contract, don't escalate it inappropriately fast. you want to escalate it only as appropriate. One of my friends who I've mentored for a while, he actually uses my contract template, and he is in a situation currently that I feel really bad for him, but I'm really happy that he has my contract template because he's navigating the waters really well because of that. He had a client that reached out to him. They wanted a retainer. He started the retainer. They started working together, and then they stopped paying him. And he said, okay, well, do you want to keep doing this? And we're just going to pause for a minute. And so he said, okay. And then a month goes by, and he goes, well, can you pay me for the work that I did for the other 2 months? And then they said, oh, yeah, we'll pay you. And then he asked him again, and he worked with him, and they had conversations for 4 months, I think. And at that point, he said, guys, like, you haven't paid me for 4 months. You owe me $4,000. I gotta take this to the next step unless you're gonna pay me. You've been telling me you're gonna pay me. And he was being nice about it and being, good about the conversation and trying to not take it to the next level. And doing that is good. And so then didn't work. So then he had to escalate that. He had to go find a lawyer, and he had to have that lawyer then send them a letter and say, hey, this is the deal. This is the contract you signed. These are the terms of the contract. And if you don't start paying him, then we're going to have to take it to the next level. So don't escalate prematurely. Just take your time and, go slowly with it. It might be exciting or enticing to be like, I'm going to take you to court. You don't want to do that. You don't want to deal with that bullshit, okay? Just take your time and try to not do that. And for the record, I hope he doesn't have to go any further than that. I hope that he is successful in getting his money that he's due, and he can move on from there. But it is a good learning lesson, and it is going back to the point that I had a while ago. Get a contract today. Don't wait. Just get one today, because you need to start using one today. If he had no contract, which before that, we work together a lot, and I'll manage the contracts. But then in that situation, he has his own clients, and for a while he didn't have a contract like that. And then, lucky for him, he started using a good, robust contract. Which, if you guys are interested, again, the link is below to my contract template, and that's the one that he used. Okay, cool. Types of contracts. Types of contracts. So, and there's going to be a lot of different types of contracts, and I'm just going to touch on some that I'm familiar with and how I've used them. The contract that I use consistently is the assignment confirmation, and that's what I use with my clients. It confirms the assignment. It has all of the terms and conditions, and it has all the details related to the project. And that's the contract I use most often. You can also have a retainer. A retainer is going to be sort of a consistent work contract, and you could use the assignment confirmation document and amend the top portion to reflect retainer and add that language. And a retainer is like, Yeti coolers. They make these little mugs and coolers and stuff. They want to work with me for 12 months, and each month we're going to do 2 videos, and they're going to pay me $5,000 and each month. And then you set that up, and you have this retainer. They sign it. It's for a year, and you could have a longer retainer. You could have a shorter retainer. I had a retainer with a client for 2 years, and I made a video every quarter, and we did that, boom, 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 and it was great. It was awesome. Retainers are fantastic. Another type of contract that's similar to a retainer but not the same is going to be a master agreement. I've done this many times with certain clients where you make this master agreement. It has all the terms and conditions, and it has some of the specifics of the project or just of the work, but it's more of the terms and conditions. You sign it. It's good for the year, and that takes care of the bulk of like the wordy legal stuff. And then you add an SOW, which is a statement of work, and this for each project. So like, you have a year, you're working with that client for a year, you have the master agreement, you don't have to worry about all the nitty gritty stuff. and then you give a statement of work, and the statement of work is just like a single paper, and it'll say like, we're gonna do the shoot on July 7th, and it's gonna be with these people, and we're gonna have this as the deliverable, and this is the budget. So you don't have all the terms and conditions, which is like all the legal stuff at the bottom. So you can have a master agreement plus a SOW, and even in the master agreement, you can have like a total budget for yourself. So it's almost retainer-esque. So it could be like, master agreement is for $100,000 for the year, and the statement of works over the year will kind of add up to that. And then the last type of contract is terms and conditions for a vendor. So I actually have another kit on my site, and I think it's the producer kit. I'm 99% sure. And inside of the producer kit, there's a contract that I use for my vendors. So if I hired you to edit for me, you would sign the terms and conditions contract that I've built because you're working for me. As opposed, you might have your own contract that you give me. So like, I could sign that, and we could go that way too. So sometimes the client has contracts, sometimes vendor does, and I have a contract for my vendors. Most often they don't have one, so I'm just going to use mine. So those are the kind of types of contracts that I'm using. All right, so I'm going to take a quick break here and look at the questions in the chat. So Cody and Jillian, they asked if the contract kit has an example of a master agreement plus an SOW. I do not have a master agreement and an SOW in the contract kit. The contract kit is going to be the assignment confirmation plus an example of the assignment confirmation. It's a real example of assignment confirmation. I had to change the client name and some of the specifics to the project, but it's actually an example of a contract that I used. But it doesn't include the master agreement or an SOW contract. I have only worked with a master agreement with the client providing the master agreement, and I haven't taken the time to create my own master agreement. So I didn't feel like it was appropriate. I'm only doing that when the client is providing the master agreement versus me providing the assignment confirmation. I hope that makes sense. Do you underpromise and overdeliver or include any possible extras in the contract? So Andrew asked that, and Andrew, it's a little vague. I think that you can over-deliver without being specific in your contract. So let's say the video deliverable is 1 minute, a 1 minute video about a rancher, right? And you can over-deliver on that by doing a really freaking good job when you make it. And maybe you put more sound design effort into it than you could have, or, like maybe that's not specific. Maybe it says sound design included, and maybe you spend 8 hours on sound design versus 2 hours, right? So you can over deliver without having that specific verbiage, or like kind of like breaching the verbiage in your contract. And in terms of extras in the contract, I would say that I'm thinking that's maybe like added value stuff. And so like, for if you don't understand what added value is, so you might say, okay, we're doing this contract and we're going to create 12 videos. Each video is going to be a 10-minute long interview video for this brand, and they're going to put them out each month. And then added value, like in that cost, $40,000 for those 12 videos, right? And then in the contract, you put a little note and you say, we're gonna give you guys this added value. We're going to do social cut downs for each video. Each of the 12 videos, we're going to do 2 social cut downs. One is a 30-second and one's a 15-second. And we're not going to charge you for that. That's just added value. So maybe the cost of that would have been $5,000, but since they're giving you a $40,000 deal, you're going to give them the added value. But you build it into the contract, and you show them that. You say, because you're buying $40,000 worth of videos, we're going to hook you up with $5,000 of added value for free. But you put it in the contract and you say this would, the cost of this would be $5,000, but this is part of the deal. It's sort of like you go to the grocery store and you buy 5 boxes of crackers and you get the 6th box free, and then you have too many fucking crackers and you don't know what to do. So that is a way to do that. I wouldn't just throw in extras outside of your contract. Put it in the contract. You don't want to just throw them in there. All right, so now we're going to talk a little specifics of video and photo. So we've been talking a lot about contracts that might apply to kind of anyone who's doing freelance work. We're going to talk specifically photo and video now. And the first thing we're going to talk about is usage and licensing. And also work for hire. So when you're starting out, especially in the beginning, a lot of people are going to want to do work for hire. And I think that it's a tough place to navigate. I did a lot of work for hire work early on, and work for hire in the short means that you work for me, like I'm the client, and I hire you, and I own everything you make. And like, that's fine as long as you understand that and you understand the repercussions of that, right? So I did that a lot in the beginning because you don't have a lot of leverage in the beginning because you're new and young and your portfolio is weak, and it's tough. You could say, I tried many times to say, no, I want to own my footage. I want to own my photos. And you guys license them from me. But they're like, well, we'll just hire someone else. Cause like, you're not really there yet. Your demand isn't as valuable. So we don't really need to do that. But once you're good enough, once your stuff's good enough, then you can start saying, I don't do work for hire. I own all my footage. I own all my photos. And then you license them. And that's where you want to be. You want to be able to license your footage and your photography versus having someone else own it. Because then they can do whatever the fuck they want with it. And that's not fantastic. You could do a shoot, you get paid $1,000, and you crush it, and somehow it makes it into a TV commercial for the Super Bowl, and you just got paid $1,000. That sucks. And that's kind of like a work for hire situation. But every situation is different, so you really need to assess it and like be realistic. You might have a job, and like maybe it's like an event thing, and like it's never gonna get there. It's never gonna be that good. It's never gonna be used in that way. So then work for hire is fine. But try to get there. Try to get there, and it's not a bad thing. But try to get there. Try to get away from that if you can. I think at this point in my career, work for hire would be very rare and specific for me. It would be about opportunity. If I had an opportunity to work for a brand in a way that I had not been able to work for them or something like that, and it was worth giving up those rights. Because if you have the rights, then you can license it. And then you can have your license expire, and then the company might relicense it, and then you get another source of revenue. So as you create content, license company A, license company B, and they have less content out there, and then it expires, they have to renew it if they want to keep using it, which means that you get another paycheck, which is good. It's another revenue stream. And you want to be fair about it, but it is something to be really considerate of. And that, that kind of leads into the copyright and ownership rights. In your contract, you want to make sure that you have verbiage related to copyright and ownership rights for your imagery. And when I say imagery, I mean like content. And if you make something, and if the contract doesn't specify work for hire, you own it. It's yours. The copyright is inherent. You don't have to apply for it. You can take the process further and go get it registered and all that stuff. And you may do that if things get complicated with a project and the usage. But you don't need to do that. You inherently own it by creating it yourself. Another thing to consider in your contract is photo credit and whether you want that to be connected with your work on where it's published or not. There is a thing called white label. And white label means that you are doing the work for a client, and then you can't put it in your portfolio. You can't show anyone. You can't even tell anyone that you did this work, more or less. You're not able to showcase this. It's literally as if someone else did it or that company created it themselves. And so if you're doing white label work, you charge more money because you can't share it. You can't use it to get more work. So another thing to think about if you're having that conversation with your client. I don't know if I've ever done white label work. Some of my friends have, and it's just something to consider. Another thing to consider in your contract, and it's super important, is overtime and defining how you're going to handle overtime. And that can be, whatever the market, kind of handles in your area. I have a clause in mind for overtime, and it's very specific about the parameters for overtime. So now I'm going to give you guys a look inside of the contract template that I have that you guys can get on my website. This is a snapshot. This is a little picture of one of the sections. This is actually the usage details area. So this area is a critical area. So, obviously you can take this and remake it, but know that this is a tiny sliver of the whole thing. And in here, we have the licensing agreement for video. You have your parties, you have yourself, the client, and then you have the media permissions. So you have, the kind of media, list the type of media. So like online, catalog, in-store, internal. There's a lot of different variations for that verbiage, and you can research that information on, you could go to like Getty Images and do some research on stock and kind of like look at the verbiage and see where it's at, and sort of that's a good tool to see kind of the different parameters, the different options for usage details, distribution, placement, size, versions, duration, language, exclusivity, constraints. And the constraints box down at the bottom, you can put other information in there. You can sort of double up on something. I often in the constraints box will put not for broadcast television. If it's not for broadcast television, I will often put it in there because that is a big, you just kind of reinforce it. So that is a little example of the contract template for you guys. Some more talking points related to the photo video specifics. You want to have something in there about reshoots and the specifics of what a reshoot means. And you want to have something in there related to cancellations and postponements, and what are the consequences of cancellations and postponements. Another one that you need to talk about in your contract is footage archival. And that's more or less going to be who is responsible, if anyone, for keeping an archive of the footage you create. So you go out and film a video for, we'll use this as an example, the hydro flask. Drinking out of a hydro flask, and you film the video, and maybe you have a terabyte of footage. Is it your responsibility to keep that footage, and for how long? And like, if you failed to do that, what is the consequence? And or is it the company's responsibility, or is it no one's? Is it you film it, you create the final asset, and then like whether you keep the footage or not is irrelevant. Maybe it says that it will not be archived. Something to consider, super important, because you don't want to get screwed, and you don't want to have that sort of discrepancy. Company might reach out to you 8 years later and say, hey, we want to do this like anniversary video. And then they say, you have that footage, right? And you're like, no, I fucking deleted it. Whoops. And then the contract didn't say, but you could say, if your contract says that you didn't have to archive it, you're good. You good. So super important. Production documents. This one. So I'm going to tell you a story on this one. So I had a project with a client, and it was a retainer project, and we did it for a couple of years. And over those couple of years, I developed the core of this series and sort of all these production documents related to the core of this series. It was repeatable. And, so we had this repeatable shot sheet. We had this repeatable script. We had this repeatable outline. We had a formula in place related to all this stuff that I did. And I created all these unique documents for this production And when it came time to renew the series, there's multiple parties involved. The end party wanted to renew with me, but the middle party didn't even consider it, and they renewed with someone else. Didn't even ask me, and that that's fine. It's kind of lame, but anyways, they did that. But on top of that, they took the documents that I made that wasn't specified in the contract, and they gave them to this other production company. And I saw this like on the back end in Google Documents, and I saw who they shared them with, and that's how I figured it all out. And I like deleted them immediately. But right after that, I added verbiage to my contract related to production documents and who owns them and the rights to them. And there might be some inherent, like, I own them because I made them, and they're inherently mine, but I'm not going to like go to my lawyer and be like, they did this, because it's not worth it. But next time that'll be in there, and it'll be very specific, and I can go to them and say, hey, you did this, it's out of the contract, and you build in a fine. You build a fine in for that, and then it's like, you owe me $300. Shouldn't have done that, So consider that production documents, not just the content you create. Who owns those? Who has the rights to those? Super important stuff. Oh, another example. So in the production, in my contract template, this is some verbiage from it related to production documents. So all documents created for this production and rights related to them, including copyright and ownership rights, remain the sole and exclusive property of my company. This applies whether documents are shared with client or internal only. So I added that wording after the fact, and now it's in there because I learned from my mistake, learned from that experience. So, contract template. So throughout this, I've shared a lot of big picture ideas, and I've gotten some granular stuff for you guys related to contracts. And as I've said multiple times, I have a contract template for you guys. We've talked about 30% of what is in that template. There's a lot in there. It would take me hours to talk about the whole thing. It's taken me like 8 years to make it. There's a lot of depth to it. So that is available for you guys. It's $50. It's on my website. And the truth of it is that I think I've probably made $26,000 thanks to my contract protecting me in different situations where I wouldn't have made that money. So if you need a contract, I think $50 is a very reasonable cost to get what has taken me a long time to create, and also what has saved my ass multiple times. And the link's in the description, links in the chat. If you don't want it, that's fine, but it's solid. But if you do get it, please know that you need to amend it for your purposes. You need to make sure you review the whole thing, dive into it. You won't have to write it all. You won't have to like really dig into the whole thing, but learn it and then change things for yourself, because we have different companies, we have different projects, so you need to amend it for yourself. And then also you should find a lawyer, because if you have a lawyer that knows your contract, they can work with you when you hit the sticky points. So there's a little investment. Maybe it's going to cost you, I don't know, $300-$400 to get your contract dialed with this template, because you buy it and then you bring it to a lawyer and you say, this is what I want to use. It's going to take very limited time for them to review it, and they probably won't have many changes. So you maybe it'll be less. Maybe it'll cost you like $200. I don't know. But you want to do it now because you don't want to get screwed. And also in the contract kit, there is an example from a real life contract that I had. I changed the names of things, but you can see how it's actually used, which would be really valuable, because there's a lot of room to change the wording of a contract based on what you need to do for that project, and you'll learn that over time. But that example should be very helpful and maybe hilarious at times. So start now. Don't be overwhelmed. Let's see. Oh, my producer kit has the other contract, which is the vendor contract template. I also have an email list on my website. If you sign up for that email list, I think, let me see if I can drop a link for that somehow. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out, the link for that. If you sign up for my email list, I send an email. I sent one email out, and tons of people opened it, and there was a surprise in there for them, and a lot of them used it, and it was great. So if you want sort of an inside track to the things that I'm going to do and share with you guys, you can sign up for my email list. I'll leave it below. I think we're getting into the questions section. Yes, questions. So we have one question in the chat. I'm going to do that one first, and then I'm going to hit these other questions that were sent to me prior. And Derek in the questions here is asking, what are your main talking points and approaches on getting a budget out of the client without having to purposely ask the question? So, Derek, I think I'm going to go back at you here and say, I just asked the question. 99% of the time, on the other side of things, a client has a budget. They have a budget or they have a budget range, and if they don't have one, they will have one. There is a budget. And if you can figure out how to get that budget honestly from them, then you're in good shape, because you can find out if it's a good fit for you. And that's sort of how I usually position it. I would say, what is, do you have a budget range for this project? And if they say no, then you say, when will you have a budget range for this project? Because they will. And if they say, we don't know, you can be like, okay, well, let me know, because I want to make sure that I'm giving you everything I can for your budget. And if it's not a good fit for me and my services, then maybe I can recommend someone else who does meet your needs as your budget needs. So basically, the reality is, like, once you get to this point quickly, okay? Here's the point you want to be at in your freelance career. This is how much my shit costs. I can make this for this much money. I can make that for that much money. This is how much it costs for me to do these things for you. How much money do you have, and how much can I do for that money? And you don't need to be a dick about it, but internally for yourself, get there. You charge $90 an hour. You charge $140 an hour. Whatever it is that you charge per hour, it takes you 8 hours to edit a video. It takes you 10 hours to do the shoot. It takes you 30 hours to prepare for it. Whatever. You figure out your budget. This is how much it costs for you to make X, Y, and Z. And the client says, we want X, Y, and Z. And you say, oh, well, your budget's 10 grand and it costs 15 grand for me to make X, Y, and Z. So now you can either say, do you have 15 grand to make X, Y, and Z? Or you get rid of Z. You say, I can make X and Y for 10. Do you want to do that? So I think that the way to find out what their budget is to ask, and then have the reasoning behind it be good, be genuine, that you want to make the best thing for them for how much money they have. But you got to make money. This is your career. This is your job. It's the same thing on your end. Like, you can't cut your budget to satisfy their needs. You can cut what you're going to make, because then you're still going to make the appropriate amount of money for the things that you're creating. Hope that makes sense. All right, next question. Do you do contracts with friends? And this is from Monica of Monet Muse. I do contracts with my friends, and one of my good friends, Chris Roller, we have a contract together that we use for all the Timberland Pro shoots. We do that stuff together, and then I hire my friend Greg Rollins and my nephew Tom Sands and my friend Gabby. Like, I hire all these people, and my friend Tyler. Like, all these people almost all of the people that I work with are my friends. And when I hire them, I have them sign a contract. I have them sign the terms and conditions if they're working for me. And if I'm working with a client that's my friend, then I would definitely have a contract. A contract is not a dirty thing. It's not a scary thing. It's a good thing. It means that you're doing it right. You're eliminating the potentials for discrepancies and arguments and vague situations. It's not a bad thing. But at the same time, like, if you're just doing a small, like, my friend Steve owns a moped shop. I've made videos for him. He doesn't have a ton of money, and he's my buddy, and I'm not going to do a contract for him. He's not going to abuse it. Like, it's a different situation in that regard. You know, he might give me $800 and like I might make this dope ass video for him, and that's fine, you know, or he might fix my moped instead. We trust each other. We have a good relationship. I don't need to do a contract for that. So situation by situation. Joe Novelsky, my buddy, asked me this question. He is getting his doctorate as an economist, so he threw out this ridiculous question. Do you ever use any moral hazard or adverse selection models to design optimal contracts? So, yes. And here's an example of how you could do that based on the story in the front. So I told the story in the beginning how I kind of got taken advantage of because of... so moral hazard is if you have a situation where the parameters are set in good faith and then they're broken after the fact, that's moral hazard. So in that situation, in that story, the account person had told me that they wouldn't use the content on billboards and buses, and then they did. So that was sort of a situation with moral hazard at stake. And the way that I could have designed the contract to be optimal for that would have been, literally, I could have put like 2 check boxes. I could have done one checkbox is billboards, and then next to it says $1,000, and then no billboards, and next to it says $0, and they have to check it. And then that would solidify whether they're going to do it and how much it costs for that. So I don't have that in my contracts right now, but if you put that into it, if that was a situation where it had to get that granular with your outdoor displays, you could do that, and that's how you would design an optimal contract related to moral hazard and adverse selection. Next question. How do you set up a contract when working with other freelancers on a project? Never more visuals. I sort of gave an answer on this already with Monica up top. If I'm hiring someone as a vendor, they're going to sign my terms and conditions contract, which is in my producer kit. And if I'm sort of partnering on a contract, then I'm going to amend my assignment confirmation contract, which is in the contract kit, to reflect both of us. So those are 2 situations. I'll add the other individual or their company to the verbiage of my assignment confirmation document, and then we'll go to the client together and say, here's the contract. And then between us, we could have a separate contract if need be, depending on the relationship that we have, that states like how we handle the funds and where they go and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the answer for that. How many revisions do you build into a contract? Do you do it by rounds or hours? Cody C video. Okay, so how many revisions do you build into a contract? I think that this question can change, or the answer to this question can change. I usually end up doing 2 rounds. So I would do an edit, deliver it, get notes, do another edit, deliver it, get notes, and then that third deliverable would be the final video. And depending, I usually won't color it or do sound until that third video goes to them and gets approved, and then I'll do color and sound, and that would sort of be like the last finishing touch, because I want to give them, the client, the opportunity to add another round. And if they do, then you just have that conversation. You say, okay, you added a round, it's another $1,000 for the round, and you do it, and then you finish after that. But I think it's a conversation you have with the client and see what their needs are. But I find that 2 rounds in that model works for me. I have played around with the idea of doing it by hours, and I've actually put that into practice, and I've tried it, and I had sort of this like edit time bucket sort of thing. So I was like, you have 20 hours, and I'll keep track on my end, and we can make as many revisions as you need to accomplish what you want with this edit time bucket. If you don't use it all, I'm still going to bill you for it. And that was fine, but it also sort of, it can become a hassle of like just setting limits on something allows everyone to get shit done. And if you don't have limits, so that could turn into 20 rounds, it can drag things out. So I am not a fan of it. I'm a fan of the rounds. Last question. If you guys have any questions who are in the live stream, drop them in the chat now. Otherwise, this is going to be the last question, and I'm probably going to be taking off right after this. So, last question. 3 points you wish you'd had earlier in your contract. Stefan from Austria. It's probably pronounced Stefan. Stefan. I don't know. Sorry, man. 3 points you wish you'd had earlier in your contract. I think the production documents point is one that I wish I had earlier, and I talked about that earlier. So who owns the production documents? So your shot sheets, your treatments, your scripts, your schedules, your call sheets, all of those things. I wish I had the production documents clause earlier in my contract. Another thing in my contract that I wish I had earlier, but I couldn't quite get there, and I sort of talked about it, was not work for hire. So having the rights to my footage and the rights to my photos, and that's going to be case by case with each client. If you are able to own your footage and stuff, boom, do that. So I wish I had been able to do that earlier, but I also think there is sort of a tipping point in your skills and your portfolio and your experience when that comes into play. So like if I hired someone to second shoot for me, or be a DP, or even take photos for me on a production, I would most likely want to have them work for hire for me, depending on their level of work, you know. So my friend Justin Keena is a really established photographer. I wouldn't expect him to do work for hire for me unless I was doing a really, really high payout. So in that situation, I'd license it. But if it's a younger person who's still kind of coming up in the scene and they've only been freelancing for a few years or something like that, it's nothing against them, but it's sort of like you do your time and then you can get to that point in my perspective, which maybe that's just because I did it. I don't know. So it's depends. And then third point that I wish I had in my contracts in the beginning would probably be, I'm gonna say the cancellation policy. I had a situation where I had that in my contract. So I have a cancellation postponement policy, and it wasn't super refined. I refined it a little after, and it didn't bite me in the ass in this situation, but I had a client cancel, I think 3 days before the shoot, and we had plane tickets booked, I had contractors booked, I had accommodations booked, I had creative done, I had all this stuff in place, and they canceled 3 days before and said, we're not going to do any of it. We're not going to do the shoot. We're not going to do the edit. We're not going to do any of that. And because of that clause that I have in my contract, it's in there now, and it was in there then, I was able to get a good cancellation fee, and it ended up being a lot of money because it was a big contract. So that worked out really well. Cancellation policy in your contract, really important. And then let's see, that's it. That's the end of the slides. I think maybe that's it. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you are here now and you're watching, if you want to hit that little thumbs up button, I would be super stoked on that. And then also, if you guys enjoyed this, share it with a friend, put this stuff into practice. I will put a link below to sign up for my email list, which I mentioned. And I will see you guys soon. I have some really cool videos that I am making right now that are kind of